Do you believe Ukraine meddled in the American election in 2016?
I do, and I think there's considerable evidence.
You do? You do?
Yes,
look,
and Chuck, let me say.
This is, Senator, this sort of strikes me as odd, because you went through a primary campaign with this president. He launched a birtherism campaign against you. He went after your faith. He threatened to, quote, spill the beans about your wife about something. He pushed a National Enquirer story, which we now know he had a real relationship
Chuck,
with the editors
you're
of the National
dragging
Enquirer.
up all that garbage.
Senator,
that's very kind of you.
Let me ask you this. Is it not possible that this president is capable of creating a false narrative about somebody in order to help him politically?
Except that's not what happened. The president released the transcript of the phone call. You can read what was said on the phone call.
Yeah, and the Biden.
Let me point out again.
And you yourself thought the Biden part was troubling.
Chuck, let me point out a game that the media is playing. You know, a question that you've asked a number of people is you've said to senators sort of aghast, do you believe that Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the election? Now that in a court of law would be struck as a misleading question. Of course Russia interfered in our election. Nobody looking at the evidence disputes that.
The president of the United States does.
Look, on the evidence, Russia clearly interfered in our election. But here's the game the media is playing. Because Russia interfered, the media pretends nobody else did. Ukraine blatantly interfered in our election. The sitting ambassador from Ukraine wrote an op-ed blasting Donald Trump during the election season.
Do you know why he did that?
That is unusual.
What did Donald Trump as a candidate say about Ukraine and Crimea during the election that might have inspired the ambassador?
So you're saying they had disagreements with Donald Trump and they wanted Hillary Clinton to get elected.
Okay, so they wrote an op-ed.
A Ukrainian parliamentarian.
That is the difference. What you're saying is you're saying a pickpocket, which essentially is a Hill op-ed, compared to Bernie Madoff and Vladimir Putin.
Do you know how ridiculous you have to sound to have the actual crew start laughing at you for your insane conspiracy theories while you're on the air? I mean, only Ted Cruz can manage to get laughed at for the insanity he's spouting on television, and he actually hear it in real time. And while Cruz's comment might seem absurd to us, what it actually proves is something much more insidious. That he's willing to repeat literal Russian talking points because it serves as yet another desperate defense of Trump. And while it was Cruz today, it seems that all Republicans are now coming on board with this tactic. Just last week, Louisiana's Republican Senator John Kennedy said the same thing on the same program.
Dr. Hill is entitled to her opinion, but when the Economist magazine,
when does opinion become fact? Does 17 intelligence services saying it? Does every Western intelligence ally saying Russia did this? I'm just sort of confused. At what point is it no longer an opinion for you?
I don't think it's an opinion. I think it's a fact. I believe the reporting by the Politico magazine.
You just said Fiona Hill. You just said Fiona Hill gave an opinion.
I believe the report. I believe the reporting by the Financial Times. I believe the reporting by the Washington Examiner. You should read the articles, Chuck. They're very well documented. And I believe that a Ukrainian district court in December of 2018 slapped down several Ukrainian officials for meddling in our election as a violation of Ukrainian law. Now, I didn't report those facts. Reputable journalists reported those facts. Does that mean that the Ukrainian leaders were more aggressive than Russia? No, Russia was very aggressive, and they're much more sophisticated. But the fact that Russia was so aggressive does not exclude the fact that President Poroshenko actively worked for Secretary Clinton. Now, if I'm wrong, and if all these journalists are wrong,
I mean, my goodness, wait a minute, Senator Kennedy, you now have the president of Ukraine saying he actively worked for the Democratic nominee for president. I mean, now come on. I mean, I got to put up, you realize the only other person selling this argument outside the United States is this man, Vladimir Putin. This is what he said on November 20th. Thank God nobody is accusing us anymore of interfering in U.S. elections. Now they're accusing Ukraine. Well, let them sort this out among themselves. You just accused a former president of Ukraine. You've done exactly what the Russian operation is trying to get American politicians to do. Are you at all concerned that you've been duped?
No.
They're now all rallying behind this baseless notion that Ukraine was responsible for interfering in the 2016 election in order to reverse engineer a justification for Trump's Ukraine investigation demand. In other words, they know that Trump went to Ukrainian President Zelensky and tried to bribe him with military assistance that had already been allocated by Congress to open a probe into Biden. They know that it was solely for his political gain, all under the pretense of corruption. But they figure that if they can retroactively will into existence the idea that there was corruption, that there was election interference, then they can somehow justify Trump's extortion scheme. They're literally rendering themselves complicit in Trump's criminal behavior. Now, this goes without saying, but no, Ukraine didn't interfere in the 2016 election. This is a bad faith reference to the fact that the then Ukrainian ambassador to the United States wrote an op-ed for The Hill wherein he criticized candidate Trump for saying he would consider recognizing Crimea as Russian territory. That's what Cruz is referring to, an op-ed. And a justified one at that, considering of course Ukraine would be critical of Trump recognizing Russia's claim to Ukraine's own sovereign territory in the immediate aftermath of Russia's invasion and annexation of that country. Think about it. If Mexico decided all of a sudden that they own Texas and the EU decided they'd recognize their claim, forget an op-ed, Trump would probably start a war over it. And you mean to tell me that Ukraine writing an op-ed in The Hill was so outlandish as to be considered election interference by the GOP? Give me a break. So while I'm pretty sure that the fact that someone writing an op-ed doesn't quite qualify as the full-blown international conspiracy that Republicans would have you believe, the more important thing to realize is that of course Ukraine wasn't rooting for the guy being propped up by the country that had just declared war on them. And beyond that, there's the fact that leaders from around the world criticized Trump prior to him taking office, not just Ukraine. The French ambassador called him a vulture. Ecuador's president called his discourse dumb. Mexico's president said he arrived in the same way as the world's most dangerous dictators arrived. Even Bibi Netanyahu said that he rejects Trump's remarks about Muslims. In total, more than 60 foreign officials condemned Trump prior to him taking office. So does Ted Cruz think Mexico also interfered in our election? Ecuador? Israel? If any criticism whatsoever, including a simple op-ed, is grounds to call something election interference, then according to GOP logic, apparently half of the international community interfered too. The fact is that this is in no way, on no planet, equivalent to the top-down, large-scale interference campaign ordered by Putin and carried out by the Russians. And look, clearly Republicans know this, but this isn't about telling the truth, it's about going on national television and purposefully disseminating false information to the American people because that is the only defense Republicans have to try and save Trump. To obfuscate the facts and sow doubt and peddle disinformation, all for the express purpose of manipulating the American people into thinking that an innocent country did something wrong, all to protect Donald Trump. And not just an innocent country, a country that was the victim of an invasion by the same country that attacked us. Not only are Republicans failing to hold Russia accountable, they're literally rewarding them by parroting their talking points. This simple fact is that the Republican Party is no longer representing the American people. They're representing Donald Trump. They'll lie every time they come on TV, manipulate their own voters, prop up regimes that attack our own country, whatever it takes to make sure Trump isn't held accountable for his criminal behavior. Of course, we can all see the truth, only now we know that people like Ted Cruz are complicit in Trump's crimes.